Hello, in this video I'm going to be interpreting my ONET interest profiler and basic interest survey scores and talking a little about how my interpretation of these fits into my eventual kind of career development. One thing to keep in mind and something that I want to emphasize though is that ONET or the basic interest survey, all they're doing is taking information that you give them and spitting it back out at you in kind of a way to understand it. So it can only operate on the stuff that you give it. And so that might show up weirdly because might give you scores that you don't like or don't understand. And that's all right, because you are a major part of this process. How you interpret things, how you interpret these results is really important. And so with that in mind, I'm going to actually start with my artistic score on here. Because my artistic score is my highest score. Here it is in the middle. But when I first saw it, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. I like art, I like music, I like making music, but it's not something that's really interesting to me as a long-term job. And kind of thinking back of where I was when I took this survey, a lot of it has to do with when I was answering those questions and I was looking at, oh, would you like to do those things? I was kind of like, yeah, I love to make music, would like to paint sets, that sounds fun, but it's not something that I want to do with the rest of my life. And so even though my artistic score is really high, that's actually something that I'm going to kind of push to the side a little bit when I'm looking at career development, because even though those are something that I really enjoy, a lot of it has to do with where I was when I took this test. However, it is important to recognize that artistic temperaments and this kind of interest in artistic things isn't just about physical or like creative arts. It's also about the kind of person that you are and the way that you might approach problems. So for example, in this case, they talk a lot about artistic people really like creativity in our work. We like to be able to approach things from a slightly different angle. We might not like a really structured, really specific way to do things. That might not feel congruent with the way that we do things. And so it's important to keep in mind that, again, all of this is up to interpretation, and it's about how you are experiencing these questions and how you are interpreting these results. And so even though my artistic temperament, this kind of hobby-based thing, might not be a great fit in terms of like, I don't want to be a set designer when I grow up, it still says a lot about the kind of person I am and the thing that I might need in my job, namely that creativity of approaching. Moving right along, I'm going to look at my social score next because it's the next highest one. So as you say here, they like working with others, they like working with people more than we like working with information. We really like things like therapy or teaching or mentoring. Those are the kind of thing that human connection is really important to us. And unlike artistic, this fits very well for me. That's exactly right. And you'll see that later, this is very stable across time. This is something that I find is going to be the most important in any job that I have. And if you find something like that, where it's like, yes, I need that in my life, then that's important to keep in mind. And so as I'm looking at the social, not only is this very important to me, but it's going to be essential to any job that I have. If I don't have that human connection in a job, I'm not going to be happy and I'm not going to be satisfied. And alternatively, I don't like working with machines. This is not something that fits well with me. And you can actually see that as it shows up. I have really low scores in enterprising and conventional. And that's almost exactly why, because that's not something that appeals to me at all. The last thing I'm going to look at on this ONET interest profiler is the investigative side. It's not quite as high as the other two, but it's still pretty high, and it's important to recognize that this has a lot to do with searching for facts and figuring out problems. That kind of very general statement fits well with me. I'm a graduate student, research is what I do. However, it's important to also keep in mind that this is very dependent on the kind of questions that they asked. Probably the reason this isn't higher is because they asked a lot of questions about doing chemical research or studying astronomy or working in a biology lab or developing a new medicine. So those are all things that I might enjoy, but the kind of research that I do is psychological research. I like talking about why do people do things, how do people tick? And that's not questions that the ONET specifically was getting at. And so that might be why my investigative isn't as high as maybe it quote unquote should be. Again, this is all up to interpretation and it's important to recognize. So I'm actually going to compare my RIASEC scores here with what I might find on the basic interest survey if you did that. So you can see here that this compares my ONET scores to my basic interest scores. And some of these are super stable across time. So you can see here, my social is almost exactly the same. My artistic's pretty stable too, even though I enjoy doing those things. However, you can see that my enterprising is super off, so is my conventional. And it's also important to keep in mind that this might not be super stable across time. So it's important to look at your interpretation with a grain of salt. Think about who you were and what you were thinking about when you were taking these scores. However, it fits well because actually the 3 things that I think are going to be most important to any job that I have are pretty stable, which is really nice. And so kind of keeping this in mind, my Holland code, which is the code that the ONET interest profile generates, is probably going to be something like ASI or IAS. Anyway, some combination of these 3 themes, because these are the most important. These are the things that stand out most to me and the things that I probably need some form of in any eventual job that I have. It's also important to recognize when you're looking at the basic interest survey that it also just kind of doesn't look like I like anything, because I'm kind of neutral-ish on almost all of this. And this can give you some important information on just how you answer things in general. So I'm pretty clear about the things I don't like, as you can see here, but I'm not as clear about the things that I do like. I'm kind of like, I would probably enjoy those things. And so again, this might, typically if you're looking at this just with a, basic, like 3.6, that's not that high. But in comparison to everything else, it's very high, and it's very important to keep in mind. So again, this kind of all comes down to all these profilers, all these assessments are doing is taking the information you're giving them and giving it back to you in a way that's easier to understand. So just keep in mind, all of this is very up for debate.